You're listening to One Family, What's God Doing? Where we explore what God's doing in YWAM locations throughout Virginia. We can't wait for you to find out what God's doing today. Well, hello everyone. We are so excited to get this time with you, and I'm excited for you to have the opportunity to learn more about what God is doing through YWAM in Virginia. And so to kick it off, I get to sit with my friend, Chris Zinchuck. Chris has been providing leadership for the YWAM locations in Virginia for a while now. And I'm excited for you to meet him if you haven't, because this is a guy that I love spending time with. And this will be a short time, but hopefully you'll get a glimpse of just how great he is. So, Chris, what would you like people to know about who you are as we start this conversation?
Well, I am kind of a normal guy. I've been called into missions even when I was a boy, and I didn't know it at the time. And I spent my life trying to work in business. I worked for a Fortune 50 company for 8 years, and then the Lord reminded me of the things that he spoke to me as a little boy. And then he called me to leave my job and to go to Israel and serve in missions. And I've been with YWAM ever since 2001. I'm married. I met someone in the mission. My wife, Kara, is incredible. She grew up as a YWAMer. And we have 3 children. And, I guess at this point, my life went from business to serving and supporting missions in over 20 nations through the last 20 years.
Yeah. And a lot has happened in the last 20 years, but a lot's happened in just the last couple years. And beginning in 2019, YWAM Richmond sent a team out to YWAM Virginia Beach. And this summer, a team was commissioned to go into Lynchburg. And part of your role has been providing leadership over that. And in addition to that, God has been inviting you to provide leadership in the space of broadcasting. And so there's a lot happening there. What has God been doing in those spaces in the past couple of years?
Yeah, well, I think we all understand that the world is changing right now. We've seen urbanization, globalization. There's been a lot of different changes in population growth where a lot of people have been moving into the cities. And now with a context like COVID, technology has really become a huge part of our culture. And so we know that the world is changing. And so is our mission, right? We were one location, and we would disciple, live, learn, in a live, learn community right here in Richmond. And now the Lord has just been speaking to us about going back into smaller areas and then using technology to stay connected as a community. So in 2019, as you shared, the Lord had us step forward to act upon on the things that we've been praying about for many years, things that he had spoken to us in visions. And we launched the location in Virginia Beach. It wasn't something that we were planning on doing, but it came out of this vision that he had spoken to me several years earlier when I saw this vision of these points of light all along the East Coast. And, I don't know if you've shared that before, but all these points of lights on the East Coast. And I knew that the Lord was wanting us to take a moment to shift our vision of being not just in Richmond, but doing outreach all along the East Coast. And after spending a few years praying about that, we sent a team to establish the location in Virginia Beach. The interesting thing was that was happening all while COVID was breaking out. It was kind of all connected. So we went from one location to 2, and then in March of 2020, everything shut down, right? Mm-hmm. And so we were sitting here in this space right here, which is my office at home. I found myself leading Zoom calls like crazy all over the place. And sort of ended up having like 25 locations because our team couldn't get together in the same place. Yeah, if you remember that, we had to stay in
Mm-hmm.
groups of 10,
Mm-hmm.
and from that moment on, we were never the same, right? We were never one community with one location. We were one community with many locations. So even though that changed, uh, technically in the culture, what happened is it helped stir us to this idea of really spreading out and going to different locations. Well, when we were praying for Virginia Beach, the Lord was also speaking to us about Lynchburg, but he said it wasn't the time yet. And then last year, the Lord just made it really clear. Now is the time. My spirit is moving in Lynchburg, and I want you to go. And so I just put the call out, and we had
Mm-hmm.
2 families move out there uh, in August of this year. And so now we have 3 physical locations, but then we have many other locations that the Lord is growing on what we're calling city lights.
It's so amazing. And it's what I've loved about all of it is, you made the comment that you weren't really looking to do some of these things, but there was this clear sense that God was inviting it. And sometimes stepping into that invitation seemed like a confusing thing or a foolish thing because I mean the world was going crazy. But what I've loved seeing as I've gotten to walk alongside is how faithful God is, and when we bring our little bit of faithfulness, even if we're not sure what God is up to, God is always faithful to do abundantly more than we could ask for or imagine. And so, to
Yeah.
that end, there's so much potentially ahead, so many ideas, so many dreams, so many things that we're sensing from God. So when you think about what God might be up to, what's been on your mind?
Yeah. Well, like you said, God is faithful to every single generation. So we don't need to be afraid about the changes that are occurring. We know that the world is different now and it's going to continue to change, but that's not anything new.
Mhm.
Um, when I think about what God is up to, I'm also thinking about what he's done in the past, and that kind of informs what he's up to now. And like in world missions, the first wave of missions that we saw was what was to the coastlands. We had like the Moravian movement and William Carey in the 1700s to the mid 1800s, and what they were doing is sending missionaries to all these different coastlands. Well, the next wave, which was a complete shift and change, was that missionaries were being sent to the interiors of the continents. And so that was like the mid 1800s to early 1900s. And people like David Livingstone and Hudson Taylor were leading out in those movements where we saw that the missionaries were taking another step, going farther into the continents. Well, then the Lord shifted and changed again.
Mhm.
And the third wave is something that many of us have heard about. It's called the unreached people groups, like the 1040 window, going to those places of the world where the gospel has not reached. And Ralph Winters and Donald McGavran have kind of led out in that theological perspective. And so a lot of the different missions movements that we've seen all the way up until the present have been this third wave of missions, which was uniquely different from the first and second. But what I see happening now is this fourth wave of missions. It's a totally new way of going out, and it's just God being faithful yet again to this generation. And what does that look like? Well, the fourth wave of missions is really all people. Like if you are a Christian, you are a missionary, right? That's part of the call of of Christ for us in the Great Commission, that we would share the love of Christ outside of our own homes, but originating from our homes. So all peoples of all ages, of all nationalities, and all spheres, using creative technology and relational approaches, just going out to the nations.
Mhm.
And that's really what City Lights is. And the Lord has given us this idea, and this really came through a dream that I had as well. As I saw um, families, they were grouped together as family units, and they were on the north shore of the Sea of Galilee. And like I had shared earlier, I used to work in Israel, so I can
Mhm.
visualize that space very clearly. but I saw these families and they were worshiping together, praying together, telling stories together. Um, and they were all on the North Shore of Sea of Galilee from 50 nations and all 50 states. And I saw that the Lord wanted to gather folks together, to gather families together for the Great Commission. And so in next year, Lord willing, uh, the idea is that by August of 2023, we're going to have our first commissioning of family units, saying that we're committed to being part of this fourth wave, that we're going to say yes to the Great Commission inside of our homes. Another way to explain it is like we really feel like the Lord wants us to take the YWAM DNA of global missions and impart it into like 1,000 families, into 1,000
Mhm.
homes. So we want to bring it to the to homes like yours,
Yeah.
right? And make uh, each home like a missionary sending agency, basically.
Yeah. It makes me think of this bonus question that I wasn't planning to ask, but I'm going to throw it out there. You talked about as God expanded the locations that people were in, whether it was in geographic places or trapped in their homes or in limited spaces. There's this idea that you still wanted to convey that they were one team. And you're also talking about this idea of bringing other people into the mission in their own homes, in their own countries. And sometimes our approach is to be isolated. Sometimes our approach is to just give somebody information and then let them run with it. But we've talked a lot between you and I and in our teams about this idea of being one family. And so when you think about this idea of being one family, both as the different YWAM locations in Virginia and inviting families and others into this work through City Lights, why is it that God invites us to function as one family rather than individual units?
Yeah, we hear this idea about unity quite often right now, and it really is a call to us as believers. This is how the world will know that we are the followers of Jesus, is by our love one for another. And so as one, this unity piece, it really is evangelism, right? So we think a lot about, oh, what is our evangelism program, or what are we presenting? Really, it's the fragrance of unity that is testifying about Jesus to the world. So, for example, just this week, I had over 70 people from multiple nations in my backyard. We had Brazilians, we had Chileans, we had Italians, we had Ukrainians. I know there are other nations, I'm not
Yeah.
thinking of them right now. Um, but we were singing and dancing, and we were
Mhm.
celebrating each other's culture. We were celebrating Jesus. We were fellowshipping together, and it was a witness to our neighbors.
Yeah.
And the only way to really do that is through Christ. So the one family piece is really stepping out of this idea of we we get a, a perspective of the gospel based upon our own cultural context and where we live, where we grew up, what church we went to, and what geopolitical boundaries that we've been engaged in, what we're hearing from the news. All these different things kind of inform what our Christian walk is like, and it somehow it gets siloed down. But when you're thinking about being a Christian globally, you're opening yourself up to a totally different viewpoint of what does it mean to go to the nations? What is God's heart for the nations?
Mhm.
And one thing that we've also talked about regarding the one family piece is that there's kind of a play on words, right? We're one family, but it's also vitally important that we think about reaching one family at a time. At YWAM Virginia, we could be one large location with everyone together, but instead we're spreading it out granularly because there's deeper relationship, right? Um, it's very difficult to have deep relationships with hundreds and hundreds of people, but you can have really quality, deep relationships with smaller numbers of people. By breaking things down, we can actually create smaller communities that are more like family units that will have deeper relationships with each other, and of course, deeper opportunities for discipleship.
Man, and we really could just...
My kids are knocking at my door right now.
It's family. It's family.
Yes.
Well, there's so much that we could dive into. And the good news is that in the coming months that we'll continue to come back to all these things. But, as we wrap up, if somebody was intrigued by what you shared, how can others walk with what's happening with YWAM in Virginia and with City Lights?
Yeah, well, we're going to, we can send out a link for you could actually legitimately just sign up to say, hey, I want to be informed about what God is doing over this next year and kind of onboarding. There are some things coming for sure. One is we are going to take teams or families to Israel. If you want to be part of that, get on the list, because we are legitimately going to go do a great commissioning of families in Israel at some point. Another thing is we've been working on this project to kind of bring the cultural context and historical context of the scripture into homes. So if you've looked at the statistics, we know that 90% of believers have never read the Bible cover to cover. That's not a shameful thing. It's not like, if you're one of those people, we're not, that's where you are. But what we would like to do is serve and support the change of that. What if every believer or every household literally had the opportunity to read the Bible together and understand it? So we've been recording 120 hours of cultural and historical context for the Bible, and we're putting it together in a video format. You could do that with your family. So those are a couple action points. Of course, as we're building and putting all this together, if you want to make donations towards all of the work that we're doing, that would be incredibly helpful as well. But and then of course prayer, right? We want to praying for families. Those are some very clear ways to get started.
Yeah. Well, we'll be sure to put information out there for people to be able to connect. And, Chris, I'm so grateful for you and your time, and just for the decades that you've given in walking in faith and obedience to what God's been inviting you to, no matter how crazy it can be at times. So thank you for your time. And thank you to everyone listening for not just listening, but for walking with us as we all together as one family explore what it means to know God and make Him known.
Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of One Family, What's God Doing? If you'd like to learn more about what God's doing in Virginia, visit us at ywamva.org and join us next week for more stories of God at work.